The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of Mrs. O'Brien's boarding house, its wheels cutting deep grooves through snow that had fallen steadily for 3 days. Elena Hartwell clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of more than just her belongings pressing against her chest. Through the frosted window she could see smoke rising from every chimney in Iron Creek, gray columns ascending into a sky the color of old pewter. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver called down, his breath forming white clouds that dissipated quickly in the brutal wind. "Storm's coming in worse tonight. You've picked a hell of a time to arrive, if you don't mind me saying." Elena stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into snow that reached mid-calf. The cold bit through her wool coat immediately, sharp as broken glass against her skin. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago, and with each mile westward, she'd felt the weight of her past growing lighter and the uncertainty of her future pressing heavier. Iron Creek was supposed to be a new beginning, a place where nobody knew about the marriage that had crumbled under the burden of her barren womb, where the pitying glances of neighbors wouldn't follow her down every street. "Thank you," she managed, her voice nearly stolen by the wind that howled down from the mountains. The Rockies loomed above the small mining town like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in clouds that promised more snow. Mrs. O'Brien emerged from the boarding house, a stout woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. "Lord have mercy, you must be frozen solid. Come in, come in. I've got stew on the stove and a fire going strong." The warmth inside was overwhelming after the bitter cold. Elena's fingers tingled painfully as feeling returned to them. The boarding house parlor was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully and the rich smell of beef stew filling the air. Through the window she could see the main street of Iron Creek, a handful of wooden buildings barely visible through the falling snow, their windows glowing with lamplight despite the early afternoon hour. "You're the seamstress from back east?" Mrs. O'Brien asked, taking Elena's coat and hanging it near the fire. "And midwife too, Mrs. Patterson said in her letter. "Yes, ma'am." Elena's hands instinctively smoothed her dress, a habit from her old life when she'd always tried to make herself smaller, less noticeable. "I have experience with both trades." "Well, you'll find plenty of work here, I'm sure. Though I'll warn you, this winter's been the worst in 20 years. We've been snowed in for weeks at a time. It's a hard life up here, Miss Hartwell." "Mrs. Hartwell," Elena corrected quietly, then added, "Though I'm a widow now." The lie came easier than she'd expected. Better to be a widow than a divorced woman. Better to be mourned than pitied for being left. Mrs. O'Brien's expression softened immediately. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dear. This country takes too many good men too young." Elena simply nodded, accepting the sympathy she didn't deserve, and followed Mrs. O'Brien upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the edge of town. In the distance, barely visible through the snow, she could see a sturdy log cabin set apart from the others, smoke rising steadily from its chimney. Something about it struck her as lonely, despite the signs of habitation. That first night, Elena lay awake, listening to the wind howl and the occasional crack of tree branches breaking under the weight of accumulated snow, as she thought about her ex-husband's words the day he'd told her he was leaving. "What good is a wife who can't give me children? You're broken, Elena. I deserve a real woman." Those words had carved themselves into her bones, a permanent ache that no amount of distance could ease. She had come to Iron Creek to escape that pain, to build a life where her worth wasn't measured by her ability to bear children. But as she lay in the darkness listening to the hostile wilderness outside her window, she wondered if she'd only exchanged one kind of loneliness for another. The next morning dawned, gray and bitter. Elena made her way downstairs to find Mrs. O'Brien preparing breakfast, the boarding house kitchen warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. "There's a church service this morning if you're of a mind to attend," Mrs. O'Brien said, sliding a plate of food across the table. "It might be a good way to meet folks. Though I'll warn you, the cold keeps most people home unless it's absolutely necessary." Elena ate slowly, building her courage. She knew she needed to establish herself in the community, to let people know she was available for work. The church seemed as good a place to start as any. The Methodist church stood at the far end of Main Street, its white clapboard siding barely visible against the snow-covered landscape. Elena walked carefully, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her breath forming white clouds. A few other hardy souls were making their way toward the building, bundled so thoroughly that only their eyes were visible. Inside, the church was drafty, despite a pot-bellied stove glowing in the corner. Elena took a seat near the back, clasping her hands in her lap and keeping her gaze down. She felt eyes on her, an inevitable curiosity of a small town toward a stranger, but she wasn't ready to meet those gazes yet. The service was simple and short. The pastor's sermon focused on perseverance through hardship, on faith during the long winter. Elena let the words wash over her without really hearing them. It was only when people began filing out that she forced herself to stand and introduce herself to those nearby. "Elena Hartwell," she said to a thin woman with 3 children clinging to her skirts. "I'm a seamstress and midwife, just arrived from Philadelphia." The woman's eyes lit up. "A midwife? Lord, we could use one." "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is—" She was interrupted by a fit of coughing from the smallest child, a girl no more than 4 years old. "How long has she been coughing like that?" Elena asked, her professional instincts immediately engaged. 3 days now. The cold, I expect." Elena knelt down to the child's level, noting the flush in her cheeks, the slight wheeze in her breathing. "Keep her warm and give her plenty of fluids. Steam from a kettle will help with the congestion. If the fever gets worse, come find me at Mrs. O'Brien's." Sarah Mitchell's gratitude was palpable. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. It's good to have someone with medical knowledge in town. Doc Henderson died last spring, and we've been managing on our own since." As Elena straightened, she became aware of someone watching her intently. She turned to find a tall man standing near the door, a silver star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Thomas Brennan. She presumed Mrs. O'Brien had mentioned him the night before. He was broad-shouldered and weathered, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a presence that seemed to fill the small church. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Elena felt something shift in the air between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. The recognition of one lonely soul seeing another. Then a small figure tugged at the sheriff's coat, and his attention shifted downward. A girl with copper-gold curls and bright blue eyes looked up at him expectantly. "Papa, I'm hungry. I know, Lily Bear. Let's get home." His voice was deep and measured, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed without needing to shout. Elena watched them leave together, the sheriff's large hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder as they stepped out into the cold. There was something in the way he moved, careful, controlled, as if he were constantly aware of potential threats, that spoke of a man who had seen too much loss. The days that followed fell into a steady rhythm. Elena set up a small corner in Mrs. O'Brien's parlor where she could take in sewing, and word spread quickly that a skilled seamstress was available. Women began bringing her dresses to mend, curtains to hem, shirts to alter. The work was steady, if not exciting, and Elena found comfort in the repetitive motion of needle through fabric and creating order from chaos, one stitch at a time. She saw the sheriff occasionally, always from a distance. He would ride down Main Street on his large bay horse, checking on the town, making sure no one was in distress. Sometimes his daughter rode with him, bundled so thoroughly that only her bright eyes were visible. Elena found herself watching for them, though she couldn't have said why. It was 2 weeks after her arrival when everything changed. Elena was sitting by the window in her room, mending a tear in one of her own dresses, when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats outside. She looked up to see Sheriff Brennan riding hard down the street, his daughter wrapped in his arms. Even from the second story, Elena could see that something was terribly wrong. She dropped her sewing and rushed downstairs, arriving in the parlor just as someone pounded on the front door. Mrs. O'Brien was already opening it, and the sheriff stood there, his face drawn with worry, his daughter limp in his arms. "She's burning up with fever," he said without preamble. "Started this morning, got worse by the hour. Sarah Mitchell said there's a woman here with medical knowledge." That would be me," Elena said, stepping forward. Her heart was racing, but her voice remained steady. "Bring her upstairs, Mrs. O'Brien. I'll need clean linens, cool water, and whatever medicinal herbs you have." The sheriff followed her up the narrow stairs, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Elena directed him to lay Lily on her own bed, then immediately began her examination. The girl's skin was hot and dry, her breathing rapid and shallow. When Elena gently pressed on her chest, Lily whimpered in pain. "Pneumonia," Elena said quietly, meeting the sheriff's eyes. The fever, the chest pain, the rapid breathing, all signs point to it. She watched the color drain from his face. "My wife died of pneumonia 3 years ago." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old grief and new fear. Elena understood then why he'd ridden so hard, why the panic had been so evident in his eyes. He was watching history repeat itself. "That doesn't mean Lily will," Elena said firmly, "but she needs constant care. The fever has to be brought down. She needs to be kept warm, but not too warm, and she'll need to drink as much as possible." "I'll pay whatever you ask," the sheriff said, and there was something raw in his voice, something that stripped away the controlled lawman exterior and revealed the terrified father beneath. "Just pleased, don't let me lose her too." Elena reached out and placed a hand on his arm, the gesture surprising both of them. "I'll do everything I can." "But Sheriff..." You need to understand. The next few days will be critical. She'll need round-the-clock care. Then I'll stay here too. I'm not leaving her. Mrs. O'Brien appeared in the doorway with the supplies Elena had requested. Nonsense. You can't both stay here cramped in this small room. Sheriff, your cabin is far more suitable for nursing a sick child. It's bigger, warmer, and you have everything you need there. Mrs. Hartwell can come stay with you and tend to Lily. Properly. Elena started to protest the impropriety of staying in a man's home, even for nursing purposes, but the sheriff was already nodding. Mrs. O'Brien is right, the cabin's better set up. And he looked down at his daughter and his voice cracked slightly. I can't be away from her. Not if she's this sick. Then it's settled, Mrs. O'Brien said briskly. Mrs. Hartwell, pack your things. Sheriff, you take Lily home and get her settled. Mrs. Hartwell will follow with her bags and supplies within the hour. An hour later, Elena found herself trudging through knee-deep snow toward the cabin she'd observed from her window that first night. Her bag felt impossibly heavy, though it contained only her most essential belongings and the medicinal supplies Mrs. O'Brien had insisted she'd take. The wind cut through her coat like knives, and by the time she reached the cabin door, her face was numb with cold. The sheriff opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her. Come in quickly. The cold's getting worse. The interior of the cabin was exactly as Elena had imagined. It's solid and practical, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple furniture that spoke of function over form. But what caught her attention immediately was the evidence of a child's presence, a rag doll sitting on a chair, slate with chalk drawings, a small pair of boots by the door, and everywhere the conspicuous absence of a woman's touch. No curtains, no decorative items, just the bare necessities of survival. She's in here, the sheriff said, leading Elena to a small bedroom off the main room. Lily lay in a narrow bed, her cheeks flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Elena immediately set to work, soaking cloths in cool water and placing them on the child's forehead and chest, measuring out doses of willow bark tea to help with the fever. What can I do? The sheriff asked, hovering in the doorway. Keep the fire going, but not too hot. We need to bring her fever down. And boil more water. We'll need it for steam to help her breathe easier. He nodded and left, and Elena heard him moving about the cabin with purposeful efficiency. She turned her full attention to Lily, gently coaxing the girl to drink small sips of the bitter willow bark tea, changing the cooling cloths regularly, monitoring her breathing. The hours blurred together. Day faded into night, and still the fever raged. Elena didn't leave Lily's side except for brief moments to use the outhouse or grab a quick bite of the food the sheriff left for her. He was always nearby, checking in regularly but staying out of the way, his face growing more haggard with each passing hour. On the second night, as Elena sat beside Lily's bed in the dim lamplight, she heard the sheriff enter the room. He carried a chair, which he set down on the opposite side of the bed. You should rest, he said quietly. You haven't slept since you got here. Neither of you, Elena pointed out, noticing the dark circles under his eyes, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see my wife in that bed instead of Lily. I see. He stopped, his jaw clenching. Elena understood. She'd learned during her midwifery training that the hardest part of caring for the sick wasn't the physical labor. It was managing the fear, both your own and that of the loved ones watching helplessly from the sidelines. Tell me about your wife, she said softly. Sometimes she'd found talking about the dead helped the living find peace. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, and Elena thought he might refuse. But then he began to speak, his deep voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Margaret, Maggie, everyone called her. She was light. She was light and laughter in a hard place. She made this cabin a home, made this whole town brighter just by being in it. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Lily's just like her. Same smile, same joy in everything. When Maggie got sick, it happened so fast. One day she was fine, the next she was burning with fever. And then ... double quotes, he trailed off, unable to finish. I'm sorry, Elena said, and she meant it. She understood loss, even if her own was different, the loss of a future she'd never have, of children she'd never bear. Doc Henderson did what he could, but it wasn't enough. I've carried that failure with me every day since, the knowledge that I couldn't protect her, couldn't save her. And now Lily. His voice broke completely, and he turned his face away. But not before Elena saw the tears on his cheeks. She reached across the bed and took his hand. It was a bold gesture, one that broke all rules of propriety, but in that moment, propriety seemed irrelevant. They were just two people sitting vigil over a sick child, bound together by their desperate need for her to survive. Lily is not Maggie, Elena said firmly, and you haven't failed anyone. Sometimes sickness comes, and all we can do is fight it with everything we have. That's what we're doing now." He squeezed her hand gratefully, and they sat like that for a long time, keeping watch together as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the main room. On the third day, Lily's fever broke. Elena woke from a brief doze, slumped in her chair to find the girl's skin cool to the touch, her breathing easier. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her hands shook as she checked Lily's pulse, felt her forehead again to be sure. "Sheriff," she called softly, and he appeared in the doorway instantly as if he'd never been far away. "The fever's broken." Elena watched as Sheriff Tom Brennan crossed the small room in 2 strides, his weathered hand reaching out to touch his daughter's forehead. When he felt the cool skin, his knees seemed to buckle slightly. He sank into the chair on the opposite side of the bed, his broad shoulders sagging with relief so profound it seemed to age and rejuvenate him simultaneously. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "Thank God." He looked up at Elena, and she saw that his eyes were wet. "And thank you." He stopped, unable to find words adequate to express what he felt. "She's not out of danger yet," Elena cautioned, though she couldn't help but smile. "The next few days are crucial. She'll be weak, and the pneumonia could return if we're not careful. She needs rest, nourishment, and warmth. Whatever she needs, she'll have it." Over the following days, Lily slowly improved. The color returned to her cheeks, and though she was weak, her eyes began to show their characteristic brightness again. Elena remained at the cabin, sleeping in the main room on a makeshift bed near the fire, while the sheriff gave up his room to Lily and slept on the floor beside her bed. As Lily grew stronger, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin. Elena would wake at dawn to find the sheriff already up, feeding the fire and making coffee. They would share a quiet breakfast before Elena went to check on Lily, and he would head out to check his trap lines or ride into town to ensure Iron Creek hadn't descended into chaos during his absence. During one such morning, as Elena was preparing broth for Lily, the sheriff came up behind her at the stove. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice hesitant in a way she hadn't heard before. "When Lily's fully recovered, you'll be going back to Mrs. O'Brien's." "Yes," Elena said carefully, not sure where this was going. "The thing is, double quotes." He paused, and when Elena turned to look at him, she found him staring at his boots like a schoolboy. "The thing is, Lily's going to need care for a while yet. And even after she's well, we've managed on our own for 3 years, but having you here, having someone who knows how to—" He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I'm not saying this right." Elena waited, her heart beating faster for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely. "Would you consider staying on? Not just as a nurse, but as a housekeeper, I suppose. Or a governess for Lily. She could use someone to teach her proper things. Reading beyond what I can manage. Sewing. All the things a girl should know. And I could pay you fairly. Better than you'd make just taking in sewing." It was a practical offer, the kind that made sense on every level. Yet Elena found herself hesitating, not because she didn't want to accept, but because she did too much, in a way that had nothing to do with employment and everything to do with the way her chest tightened when the sheriff smiled at his daughter, the way she'd come to anticipate his return to the cabin each evening. The way this place had started to feel like something she'd never had before, a home. She began, but before she could continue, Lily's voice called weakly from the bedroom. "Mrs. Hartwell? Papa?" They both moved toward the room, the conversation tabled for the moment. Lily was sitting up in bed, the first time she'd had the strength to do so in days. Her face was pale but alert, and when she saw them both, she smiled. "I'm hungry," she announced, and both adults laughed with relief. Nothing proved recovery quite like a child's appetite returning. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Elena said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How about some broth? And maybe a bit of bread if your stomach can handle it. Can you stay?" Lily asked suddenly, her blue eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that seemed too old for her 9 years. "Papa says you have to leave when I'm better, but I don't want you to go. It's nice having you here." "It's like ... double quotes," she trailed off, as if uncertain how to finish. Elena's throat tightened. "Like what, honey?" "Like having a mama again," Lily said quietly, and the simple honesty of it broke something open in Elena's chest. She felt the sheriff's eyes on her, but couldn't bring herself to look at him. Instead, she smoothed Lily's tangled curls and said gently, "I'm not your mama, Lily. But She stopped, her voice catching. "But you care about her," the sheriff said softly from the doorway, "and she cares about you. That much is plain to see." Lena finally looked up at him, and in his storm-gray eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not pity, not charity, but genuine warmth, genuine hope. "I'll get that broth," she said, needing to escape the weight of the moment. The implications of what was unfolding in this small cabin at the edge of the wilderness. That night, after Lily had eaten and fallen into a healthy, natural sleep, Elena sat by the fire in the main room, trying to make sense of the emotions churning inside her. She heard the sheriff's footsteps behind her, but didn't turn around. "I need to tell you something," she said before he could speak, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Before you make your offer again, before this goes any further, you need to know." "All right," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. Elena stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker, gathering her courage. She'd told no one in Iron Creek the truth about her past, had hidden behind the respectability of widowhood. But she couldn't accept his offer under false pretenses, couldn't let him build expectations that she could never fulfill. "I'm not a widow," she began. "My husband left me. He divorced me back in Philadelphia, and that's why I came here to escape the scandal. The shame of it." She heard the sheriff shift slightly, but pressed on before she could lose her nerve. "He left me because I can't have children. I'm barren, Sheriff Brennan. I've been to doctors, tried every remedy they suggested, and the answer is always the same: I will never bear a child. And my husband," he said, double quotes, her voice wavered. "He said I was broken, that I wasn't a real woman, that any man would be a fool to want a wife who couldn't give him children." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old pain. Elena waited for the inevitable withdrawal, the polite but firm rescinding of his offer. She'd seen it before, the way people changed when they learned about her condition, as if barrenness were contagious, as if her inability to conceive made her somehow less than whole. But the sheriff didn't move away. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression thoughtful rather than shocked. "Your husband was a fool," he said finally, and his voice carried an anger that surprised her, not at her, but for her, "and a coward for leaving you like that. But don't you see? If I stay here, if I become part of Lily's life, I can never give you more children. I can never, Elena." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the intimacy of it stopped her words. "Look at me," she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I've got a daughter who needs a woman's care and guidance. I've got a cabin that's been missing warmth and life for 3 years. And I've got a heart that's been frozen solid with grief, until you walked through that door 2 weeks ago and started thawing it out whether I wanted you to or not." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I'm not asking you to bear my children. I'm asking you to help me raise the one I've already got. I'm asking you to make this house a home again. And if I'm being honest, I'm asking if maybe someday you might consider more than just employment." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sheriff Brennan, Tom," he corrected. "If we're going to have this conversation, you should call me Tom." "Tom," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "You say that now, but in a year, 5 years? When you see other men with large families, when you realize what you've given up—" "I already know what I've given up," he interrupted gently. "I gave up my wife 3 years ago. I gave up my plans for more children. I gave up my belief that I could protect the people I love from every harm." He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "What I haven't given up on is the possibility that there might be a different kind of future ahead, one I hadn't planned for, but one that might be just as good, maybe even better." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I don't need you to bear my children, Elena. I need you to help me raise Lily. I need your strength, your kindness, your skill at healing body and spirit. I need—" his voice dropped to barely more than a whisper— "I need to not be alone anymore. And I think maybe you need the same thing." Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. All her life, she'd been taught that her worth as a woman was tied to her ability to bear children, that without that fundamental capability, she was somehow incomplete. But this man, this strong, weathered, heartbroken man, was offering her something she'd never thought possible. Acceptance exactly as she was, flaws and all. "I don't know how to be part of a family," she admitted, her voice shaking. "My marriage was cold even before he knew about my condition, and after it was just duty and disappointment. I don't know what love looks like, Tom. I don't know if I'm capable of—" "Neither do I," he interrupted. "Not anymore. Maggie and I, we had something special, but she's gone. What you and I might build, it would be different, new. But that doesn't mean it couldn't be real." He stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Take time, think about it. But know this, Lily already loves you. And I— He stopped, swallowed hard. "I think I could too. If you'd let me." Elena looked up at him. This man who had barged into her carefully constructed walls and somehow found the one password that unlocked them. Acceptance. Not despite her brokenness, but inclusive of it. Seeing her whole self and choosing not to turn away. "I'd like to stay," she said softly, "at least for a while, to see if to see if this could work. The smile that spread across Tom's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warming everything it touched. That's all I'm asking. A chance. Outside, the wind had finally died down, and through the cabin window Elena could see that the snow had stopped falling. The stars were visible for the first time in days, brilliant against the black sky. It felt like an omen, a promise that even the longest winters eventually gave way to spring. The weeks that followed were among the strangest and most wonderful of Elena's life. She moved her belongings from Mrs. O'Brien's boarding house to the cabin, accepting the raised eyebrows and whispered speculation with a dignity that surprised even herself. Let them talk, she was past caring what the world thought of her choices. Lily recovered fully, her energy returning with a vengeance that left both adults exhausted by evening. Elena threw herself into making the cabin more livable, sewing curtains for the windows, quoting the cluttered storage areas, teaching Lily her letters and numbers at the rough-hewn table each afternoon while snow continued to fall outside. Tom returned to his duties as sheriff, but Elena noticed changes in him. He smiled more often, lingered over breakfast instead of rushing out, and sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip, not the cold assessment she'd grown accustomed to from her ex-husband, but something warm and wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. They didn't discuss marriage, didn't even discuss the possibility of anything romantic between them. But there were small moments, a hand resting briefly on a shoulder when passing in the cramped cabin, eyes meeting across the room when Lily said something particularly charming, the comfortable silence that settled between them in the evenings after Lily was asleep. One night, about 6 weeks after Elena had moved in, Tom came home from town with a troubled expression. Elena was mending one of Lily's dresses by the fire, and Lily herself was already asleep. "What's wrong?" Elena asked, setting aside her sewing. Tom hung his coat and hat, shaking off the snow. "Ran into Ben Morrison at the saloon. He was asking about you." Elena's stomach clenched. Ben Morrison ran the assay office and was one of the town's biggest gossips. "What did he say?" "Wanted to know what your intentions were here. Said it didn't look proper, you living under my roof without being married or even related." Tom's jaw was tight. "I told him it was none of his damned business, but he's right," Elena finished quietly. "People are talking. Let them talk. It's not just your reputation at stake, Tom. It's Lily's, too. And mine." She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "Maybe I should go back to Mrs. O'Brien's. I could still come during the day to help with Lily. But at night, no." Tom's voice was firm. "You're not going anywhere." He crossed the room to her, and there was an intensity in his eyes that made Elena's breath catch. "I'm tired of letting other people's opinions dictate my life. I'm tired of being alone, of watching Lily grow up without a mother's love, of pretending that having you here doesn't make everything better." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, despite the roughness of his skin. "Marry me, Elena. Not because of what people say, not because it's proper, but because I want you here, because Lily needs you, because He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Because I love you." Elena's eyes widened. "You love me?" "I do." His thumbs brushed away the tears that had started sliding down her cheeks. "I know it's fast. I know it's not the romance you probably dreamed of as a girl, but this is the truth, simple and plain. You've brought life back into this house, into my daughter, into me. I look at you and I see the future again, not just the past, but I can't give you children," she whispered, needing him to really understand what he was signing up for. "I'll never be able to, Elena." He leaned his forehead against hers, and his voice was soft but certain. "I don't want more children. I want you. I want to watch you teach Lily how to become a woman. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, the life we have, not some imaginary life we'll never get." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Then you'll carry my name," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken once before, that day Lily had first gotten sick. "And Lily will carry your love. That's family enough for me, more than enough. It's everything." Elena felt something break open inside her chest, not painfully, but like ice cracking under spring thaw, like a door she'd kept locked for years finally swinging open. All her life she'd been told that her worth was tied to her womb, that without the ability to bear children she was less than whole. But this man, this good, honest, heartbroken man was offering her a different definition of worth, of womanhood, of family. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like a revelation, like truth she'd been carrying without knowing it. "I didn't think I could, didn't think I knew how. But Tom, I love you, and I love Lily, and I want," her voice broke, "I want to stay. I want to be your wife. I want to be Lily's mother, even if I can never be in the traditional sense. The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative, like two people learning a new language together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "I should probably ask you properly," Tom said, a hint of nervous humor in his voice. He started to kneel, but Elena stopped him, laughing. "You don't need to do that. You've already asked, and I've already said yes. Still feels like I should do something official. Make it real. This is real," Elena said, taking both his hands in hers. "This moment, this choice, it's the most real thing I've ever done." They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, making promises without words. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but inside the cabin, there was only warmth and light, and the beginning of something neither had expected to find in the brutal winter of the Rockies. They were married 2 weeks later in the small Methodist church, with what seemed like the entire population of Iron Creek crammed into the pews despite the brutal cold. Elena wore a simple dress of deep blue wool that she'd sewn herself, and Tom wore his best shirt and vest, his silver star polished until it gleamed. Lily stood between them during the ceremony, holding a small bouquet of dried flowers that Mrs. O'Brien had somehow managed to preserve from the previous summer. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Lily let out a cheer that made the entire congregation laugh. Afterward, there was a modest celebration at the saloon, which had been transformed for the occasion. Food appeared from every household, precious supplies saved and shared in celebration. Miners danced with shopkeepers' wives, children ran underfoot, and for a few hours, the hardship of the winter was forgotten in the warmth of community joy. Elena found herself pulled from person to person, receiving congratulations and well wishes. Sarah Mitchell hugged her tightly, whispering, "Thank you for saving my little one," referring to her daughter whose cough Elena had treated that first day. Ben Morrison, who had caused such trouble with his gossip, shook Tom's hand and mumbled an apology that Elena chose to graciously accept. But the moment that meant the most came when Lily tugged on Elena's skirt and looked up at her with those bright blue eyes. "Can I call you Mama?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. Elena knelt down, not caring that she was creasing her new dress, and pulled Lily into a tight embrace. "I would be honored if you called me Mama." "Good," Lily said matter-of-factly, "because that's what you are." And in that moment, Elena understood what Tom had been trying to tell her all along. Family wasn't about blood or biology. It was about choice, about showing up every day and choosing to love someone, to care for them, to build a life together despite the obstacles. It was about taking broken pieces and fitting them together in new ways, creating something stronger than what had been before. That night, as they returned to the cabin, their cabin now, Tom carried a sleeping Lily inside while Elena banked the fire. When they both stood in the main room, the weight of the day settling over them, Tom reached for her hand. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Elena looked around the cabin that had become her home, thought of the child sleeping peacefully in the next room, felt the warmth of her husband's hand in hers. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." He pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet darkness, listening to the wind outside and the crackling of the fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more snow, more cold, all the hardships of frontier life. But they would face those challenges together now as a family. Elena thought back to that first day she'd arrived in Iron Creek, broken and alone, convinced that her inability to bear children made her worthless. How wrong she'd been. How beautifully, wonderfully wrong. Because standing here now in this rough cabin at the edge of the wilderness, she had everything she'd never known she needed. A husband who loved her exactly as she was, a daughter who called her Mama, and a place to call home. The winter would eventually give way to spring. The snow would melt, revealing new growth beneath. But the family they'd built in the depths of that brutal season would endure, stronger for having been forged in the cold. Elena had come to Iron Creek to escape her past, but she'd found something far more valuable, a future she'd never dared to imagine. Built not on what she couldn't do, but on what she could love fiercely, care deeply, and choose family every single day. And that, she realized, was more than enough. It was everything. The spring came slowly to Iron Creek, as it always did in the high mountains. The first signs were subtle, a slight warming in the air, the sound of ice cracking on the river, longer periods of daylight that made the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. Elena watched these changes from the cabin window each morning, marveling at how different her life had become. She had been Mrs. Thomas Brennan for 3 months now, and the title still felt new and wonderful every time someone used it. More wonderful still was the sound of Lily calling her Mama without hesitation, as if Elena had always been her mother, as if there had never been any other possibility. The rhythm of their days had settled into something comfortable and right. Tom would leave at dawn to patrol the town or check on outlying homesteads, often taking Lily with him on the gentler days. Elena would work on her sewing. She still took in work from town, though now more as a way to maintain her independence than out of necessity. In the afternoons, she would teach Lily her lessons, and they would prepare dinner together, Lily standing on a stool to help knead bread or stir soup. But it was the evenings that Elena treasured most. After Lily was tucked into bed, Tom would pull Elena onto his lap by the fire, and they would talk about their days, their dreams, their plans for the future. Sometimes they wouldn't talk at all, just sit in comfortable silence, his arms around her, her head on his shoulder, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. One evening in late March, as the snow finally began to show signs of real melting, Tom came home with news. "Ran into the circuit judge today," he said, hanging up his hat. "He'll be passing through next month on his way to Cheyenne." "Oh?" Elena looked up from the shirt she was mending. Tom's expression was carefully neutral, but Elena had learned to read the subtle signs of his emotions. There was something he wanted to say, something he was nervous about. He mentioned that he could handle any legal matters while he's here. Will's property transfers, double quotes. He paused. "Adoptions." Elena's needle stilled. "Adoptions?" "I've been thinking," Tom said, sitting down across from her. "Lily calls you mama, you raise her as your own, but legally you have no claim to her. If something happened to me, you'd have no rights. The court might even try to take her away, place her with relatives back east." The thought sent a cold spike of fear through Elena's chest. She hadn't considered that possibility, had been so wrapped up in the joy of her new life that she hadn't thought about its legal fragility. "I want you to adopt her," Tom continued. "Make it official, make it legal, make it so that no one can ever question that Lily is your daughter just as much as she is mine." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that?" "I would do anything to protect this family," Tom said simply. "And I want Lily to have the security of knowing that you're her mother in every way that matters, including the law." When they told Lily the next morning, the girl's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Does this mean Mama's name will be on my papers, like Papa's is?" "That's exactly what it means," Tom said, ruffling her hair. "Good," Lily declared. "Because everyone should know she's my real mama. Not just the mama of my heart, but my real, actual mama." The adoption proceedings took place on a warm April day, with the judge setting up temporary court in the back room of the saloon. It was a simple affair. Tom and Elena both signed papers. Lily answered a few questions about whether she wanted Elena to be her legal mother. Her enthusiastic yes made everyone in the room smile, and then it was done. "Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan," the judge said, shaking Elena's hand. "You're now the legal mother of Lily Brennan." That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, too excited to settle down, Tom found Elena sitting on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the mountains. The snow had retreated to just the highest peaks, and the valley was beginning to show patches of green. The air smelled of pine and melting snow and the promise of new growth. "You all right?" Tom asked, settling beside her on the bench he'd built. "I'm perfect," Elena said, leaning against his shoulder. "I'm just thinking about how strange life is. A year ago I was in Philadelphia, convinced my life was over because I couldn't have children. And now, she gestured at the cabin behind them where their daughter slept. Now I have a child. A daughter. Legally, officially mine." "You've always been hers," Tom said. "The papers just make official what's been true since the day you refused to leave her side when she was sick." Elena was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I used to think I was broken, that not being able to bear children made me less than whole. But I've learned something these past months." "What's that?" "That there are many ways to become a mother. Growing a child in your womb is only one of them. Growing them in your heart, that's just as real, just as true." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the twilight. "Lily isn't my daughter by blood, but she is my daughter in every way that matters. And I couldn't love her more if I had given birth to her myself." Tom kissed her temple gently. "She's lucky to have you." "We both are. I'm the lucky one," Elena corrected. "I came here expecting to spend my life alone, doing my work and keeping to myself. Instead, I found a family. I found love. I found purpose." She paused, then added quietly, "I found home." They sat like that as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, and Tom's arm tightened protectively around her. But Elena wasn't afraid. She had learned that the wilderness, for all its dangers, could also be a place of profound beauty and unexpected grace. Inside the cabin, Lily stirred in her sleep and called out, "Mama?" Elena stood immediately, Tom following behind her. They found Lily sitting up in bed, her face creased with the confusion of a dream interrupted. "I'm here, sweetheart," Elena said, sitting on the edge of the bed and smoothing Lily's tangled curls. "Did you have a bad dream?" No, Lily said, her voice thick with sleep. A good one. I dreamed you were here forever and ever, and we were a family, and nothing could ever change that. That's not a dream, Tom said from the doorway, his voice warm. That's real life now. Promise? Lily asked, looking between them with those bright blue eyes. Promise, Elena said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Good, Lily said, lying back down. Because I love you, Mama. I love you too, Lily Bear, Elena whispered, tucking the blankets around her daughter. More than all the stars in the sky. As Elena stood to leave, Lily grabbed her hand. Mama, I'm glad you can't have babies. Elena's breath caught, and she heard Tom shift behind her. Why's that, honey? Because if you could have babies, you might have your own children somewhere else, and then you wouldn't be here with us. You wouldn't be my mama. Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, as if this logic was perfectly obvious. So I'm glad God made you just right to be my mama instead of someone else's. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. But for once they were tears of pure joy. From the mouths of children came the deepest truths. Lily didn't see her inability to bear children as a flaw or a failure. She saw it as the very thing that had brought them together. The path that had led Elena to this cabin, to this family, to this life. You're absolutely right, Elena managed to say. I am exactly where I'm meant to be. After Lily had fallen back asleep, Tom and Elena returned to their own room. As they lay in bed, Tom's arms around her, Elena finally felt the last piece of her old pain crumble away. She had spent so many years believing she was broken, believing her worth was diminished by what her body couldn't do. But Lily had shown her the truth in a single innocent observation. She wasn't broken at all. She had simply been walking a different path, one that had led her exactly where she needed to be. Thank you, she whispered to Tom in the darkness. For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for giving me a family when I thought I'd never have one. She turned in his arms to face him. And for whispering, then you'll carry my name when I told you I couldn't have children. For understanding that family is built, not just born. Elena, Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. You gave us just as much as we gave you, maybe more. You brought life back into this house, hope back into my heart, a mother's love back into my daughter's life. You healed us just as surely as you healed Lily's pneumonia. They held each other as the night deepened around them, two broken people who had found each other in the wilderness and discovered that their broken pieces fit together perfectly, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either had been before. The years that followed were not without hardship. Life in the frontier never was. There were harsh winters and drought summers. There were illnesses and injuries. There were conflicts with miners and struggles with the isolation. But through it all, the family of three remained strong, bound together by choice and love rather than blood. Elena became known throughout Iron Creek and the surrounding territory as a skilled midwife and healer. She brought dozens of children into the world, eased the suffering of the sick and dying, and became a pillar of the small community. And if sometimes a woman would come to her, ashamed and heartbroken because she couldn't conceive, Elena would take her hands and tell her story, the story of how she had found her daughter not through birth but through love, how family could be built in ways beyond blood. Tom continued his share of keeping peace in Iron Creek with a firm hand and a fair heart, but where once he had been distant and closed off, he now smiled easily, laughed with the miners in the saloon, and was known as a family man who doted on his wife and daughter. And Lily grew into a strong, confident young woman, knowing without doubt that she was deeply loved by both her parents. She would eventually become a teacher herself, moving to Denver but always returning to Iron Creek for visits, bringing her own family to meet the grandparents who had chosen each other against all odds. But that was years in the future. For now, in this moment, the Brennan family of three lay sleeping in their cabin at the edge of the wilderness, warm and safe and together. Outside, the last snow of winter melted away, revealing the green shoots of spring beneath. And in the morning, they would wake to a new day, a new season, a new chapter of the life they had built together. Elena's journey had begun in pain and rejection, in the cruel judgment of a society that measured a woman's worth by her womb. But it had led her here, to this place of acceptance and love, where she learned the most important truth of all. Family was not about blood or biology. It was about showing up every day and choosing to love, to care, to build something beautiful out of broken pieces. She'd come to Iron Creek as a woman who believed herself incomplete. She'd found a family that taught her she was exactly who she was meant to be. And that was the greatest gift of all.